Hey everyone, welcome back to Behind the Veil. And in this episode, we're going over Joseph Smith's and Emma Smith's, let's say, difficult relationship. But before we dive into that, I got something I want to show you guys. Like I said last time, we have a website up, and it's amazing. We spent a lot of time working on this, and we're going to continue putting in many hours into making this amazing. So it's called The Church Expositor, and what we have on here is, first, we have links to our last 3 episodes. So if you click on watch video, it'll take you straight to the YouTube video for that podcast. Also, we have blog posts. So each episode will have some corresponding blog posts. So if you guys rather read the content, they are in written format on the website. And we are working on getting all the blog posts up there. We're getting a blog post up for all of our previous episodes, so it may take some time, but we are going to get those up as soon as possible. Also, we have merch. We have some fantastic products. We've got shirts, we've got bags, we've got hoodies, we've got cups, we've got tumblers, we've got wine glasses, and it's amazing. So on here, I think my favorite product is this first hoodie. The coffee, the Devil's Magic Bean Rodder. Because, no, I love my coffee, so I will definitely be grabbing myself this hoodie. But enough with yammering on about our website and our products. Let's go ahead and dive into today's episode, which we will detail the very broken and adulterous relationship of Joseph and Emma, including how she tried to poison him and threatened to indulge in adultery herself, threatened that blood would flow if he did not kick his young brides out of the house. She burned Section 132 in a fire, and many other fascinating stories about their marriage that the LDS Church doesn't want you to know. And all of our sources for this video will be on the corresponding blog posts on our website, which will be up very soon. So, and Joseph Smith and Emma's relationship was very scandalous from the very beginning. So in an 1834 affidavit of Emma Hale's father, who was Isaac Hale, it was published in a newspaper called the Susquehanna Register. So let's review just some of the statements from Emma Hale Smith's father, Isaac Hale. So in this affidavit, he says, I first became acquainted with Joseph Smith Jr. in November of 1825. He was at the time in employ of a set of men who were called money diggers, and his occupation was that of seeing or pretending to see by means of a stone placed in a hat, and his hat closed over his face. In this way, he pretended to discover minerals and hidden treasure. His appearance at this time was that of a careless young man, not well educated, and very saucy and insolent to his father. After these occurrences, young Smith made several visits at my house, and at length asked my consent to marry my daughter, Emma. This I refused, and gave him my reasons for doing so, some of which were that he was a stranger and followed a business that I could not approve. He then left the place. So we're going to take a quick pause on that. First, I want to point out that Emma's father states that while Joseph was living in his home, he was a careless young man, and that he was very saucy and insolent to his father. This paints a very different picture of Joseph Smith as a young man than the LDS Church tries to put forth. Joseph was engaging in practices that were illegal at the time, and we actually did an entire episode on all of the illegal practices that Joseph Smith did. You can check that out. I believe it's 2 episodes back. So also, his illegal activities included money digging, using seer stones to discover hidden treasure, and once again, he was very disrespectful to his own father. These details alone would be cause for concern for any parents over their daughter marrying such a man. No one would want their daughter marrying someone who engages in deceitful and illegal behavior to make money. So let's continue on with this affidavit. Not long after this, he returned, and while I was absent from home, carried off my daughter into the state of New York, where they were married without my aberration. I apologize.
Approbation.
Aberration. Thank you so much. Or consent. Joseph Smith Jr. Resided near me for some time after this, and I had a good opportunity of becoming acquainted with him and somewhat acquainted with his associates. I consequentially believe from the facts I have detailed and from many other circumstances, which I do not deem necessary to relate, that the Book of Mormon, so called, is a silly fabrication of falsehood and wickedness got up for speculation and with a design to dupe the credulous and unwary, and in order that its fabricators might live upon the spoils of those who swallowed upon the deception. Wow.
He does not mince words, does he?
He does not.
Yeah. So Emma's father clearly did not have any respect for Joseph Smith or his dishonest and illegal ways of making money.
Mm-hmm.
He also makes it very clear that Joseph's intentions for the Book of Mormon involved making money rather than it being some restoration of a lost gospel originating with divine direction. He also states that Joseph was a stranger, which essentially that they just didn't know him very well.
Mm-hmm.
And Isaac did not want this unscrupulous man marrying his daughter, which is very understandable. However, Joseph and Emma eloped in January of 1827. They lived away from Emma's family for a time, but due to the very hasty circumstances of their marriage, she needed to return home to get her belongings. And so Peter Ingersoll helped Joseph and Emma return to her home in Harmony, Pennsylvania, where there was an extremely emotional reunion between Emma and her father. Ingersoll details this emotional event in an affidavit signed December 2nd, 1833. And he says, his father-in-law, Mr. Hale, addressed Joseph in a flood of tears. You have stolen my daughter and married her. I had much rather have followed her to her grave. You spend your time digging for money, pretend to see in a stone, and thus try to deceive people. Joseph wept and acknowledged he could not see in a stone now, nor never could. He then promised to give up his old habits of digging for money and looking in stones. So, as you can see, Emma married Joseph despite the fact that she hardly knew him and against her father's wishes. Now, I realize that many people in today's society believe that a woman has a right to marry anyone she chooses without a father's consent. I understand that. However, in this case, her father was entirely justified in his opposition to this marriage. As we will detail throughout this entire podcast, Emma suffered greatly because of her marriage to a dishonest and unscrupulous man. When Emma and her father were reunited after the elopement, her father was so distraught that he said he would rather have buried her than have her marry Joseph. And I realize this is an extreme statement to say that you would rather your daughter be buried than marry a certain man. However, when you realize that within 1 year of their marriage, Joseph was already being accused of engaging in inappropriate sexual advances towards underage girls as young as 16 years old, among a host of other things that went on throughout their marriage, including bank fraud, ordering the destruction of the printing press, inciting riots, and many other things, it becomes more understandable how upset Isaac was that Emma married Joseph. Joseph actually did stop looking into stones for money digging. However, he just turned his sights on using the stones for, quote, religious purposes instead. So I don't know that that's necessarily better because he's still deceiving people, but he somewhat did keep that promise. He claimed that he finally found treasure in the earth, golden plates that were hidden in the earth by an ancient prophet that are records of an ancient people. He then proceeds to use the same stone in the hat ruse to translate the Book of Mormon by looking in the same seer stone used for his treasure digging. So he kind of stopped, but he was still using the same tactics.
Yeah, and even though it wasn't directly for money digging, it was basically money digging because he made a lot of money off his religion eventually. I guess he did end up in debt, but still.
They had a lot. They had a mansion, they had a steamboat, they had a lot of
Mhm.
property. Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
And as you all know, he ends up creating a religion where he uses the name of God to implement the practice of polygamy, or more accurately called adultery. Let's just call it
Yeah.
what it is.
Yep.
He married 7 girls who were under the age of 18. So here on the screen, I've got a little picture from MormonInfographics.com that outlines all of Joseph Smith's wives. It outlines the 7 wives under age 18, 11 polyandrous wives who, what that means is were already married to another man. And and Joseph had married and committed adultery with many of Emma's closest friends. His deceitful behavior turned from a more innocuous treasure digging to claiming God gave him approval to commit adultery with at least 34 women. And when we say he committed adultery, we mean like adultery, the literal meaning of adultery. And that is exactly what Emma Smith stated to William McLean. William McLean recorded in his notebook his extended conversation with Emma Smith on August 28th, 1847. It says, Mrs. Joseph Smith, the widow of the prophet, told me in 1847 that she knew her husband, the prophet, practiced both adultery and and polygamy. This is the earliest accusations of sexual activity against, or inappropriate sexual activity between against Joseph Smith, I should say. And it began very early in their marriage in Harmony, Pennsylvania in 1828 or 1829 ish. And Emma's cousin, Levi Lewis, quoted Martin Harris, who accused Joseph of attempting to seduce Emma Winters, a young girl who Emma knew very well. Lewis further said that he was well acquainted with Joseph Smith Jr. and Martin Harris, and that he has heard them both say that adultery was no crime. This statement that Joseph Smith and Martin did not believe that adultery was a crime is clearly and undeniably true. Like, we have undeniable proof that Joseph committed adultery in statements by women in the Temple Lot case and in other situations where women claimed they believed their child was fathered by Joseph. So, regardless of whether DNA evidence proves that he was or wasn't the father, that's beside the point. If you believe a man could be the father of your child, there's only one way that would even be possible. So he was committing adultery regardless of whether or not he had any children with these other women. The reasons that he did not father any children with his wives is a whole other story that we will not go into today. So let's jump back into the story of Eliza Winter.
Yeah, so her name was Elizabeth. They called her Eliza. She was born in 1812, which made her 16 years old at the time that Joseph was making inappropriate sexual advances towards her. And in reality, this falls right in line with Joseph's MO. As we know, he married 7 underage girls. So he basically later implements God sanctioned adultery, where he coerces these underage girls to, quote, marry him. So, continuing on with another statement about Eliza, she was often at the Smiths' home and much in Mrs. Smith's company. The young women were on very intimate terms. Again, Joseph does this all the time with young girls that are living in the home, helping Emma out, that type of a thing. That was from a Harmony. That statement was from a Harmony resident, Mrs. Romanthus Stalker. Joseph and Emma's abrupt May 1829 departure from Harmony, Pennsylvania may have been precipitated in part by Levi Lewis's accusations that Joseph had acted improperly towards 16-year-old Eliza Winters. And in fact, 50 years later, Levi's brother, Hyle Lewis, repeated the same sexual accusations against Smith in the Amboy, Illinois Journal. So we also have An affidavit of Levi Lewis, March 20th, 1834, in the Susquehanna Register and Northern Pennsylvanian, May 1st, 1834. So in both of those publications. For Harris's 1828-1829 alleged view that adultery was no crime. So these affidavits that were being published, they were accusing Martin Harris of having a view that adultery was no crime. So prior to 1829, Lucy Harris, Martin's wife, said of her husband's behavior with a Mrs. Haggard, he spent most of his leisure hours with Mrs. Haggard and made her presents of articles from the store and our house. He carried these presents in a private manner, and frequently when he went there, he would pretend to be going to some of the neighbors on an errand or to be going into the fields. After getting out of sight of the house, he would steer a straight course for Haggard's house, especially if Mr. Haggard was away from home. At times when Haggard was away from home, he would go there in the manner above described and stay till 12 or 1 o'clock at night, sometimes until daylight. This is completely inappropriate. Mm-hmm. That was also in an affidavit of Lucy Harris on December 1st, 1833. So here we see in a very clear, very, very, very clearly in an affidavit of Martin Harris's wife that her husband was engaged in some sort of affair early on, validating the earlier claims that he and Joseph both believed that adultery was no crime. And this was the type of behavior that these early men in the church had prior to any of this revelatory stuff about God sanctioning their adultery. So it kind of paints a picture of why they're probably just trying to bring God into this whole situation. In March 1830, a revelation addressed to Martin Harris warned him, and this can be found in Doctrine and Covenants 19:25, and it says, "I command thee that thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor seek thy neighbor's life." Again, further validating claims that Martin Harris was first engaging in adultery before Joseph comes up with his so-called revelation about polygamy. So this was just behavior that they were already doing. Ezra Booth, who was a group companion to Martin Harris in Missouri in 1831, wrote shortly after his apostasy to Reverend Ira Eddy on December 6, 1831. And he says, "It has been made known by revelation," see Revelation to Joseph Smith, July 1831, "in that it will be pleasing to the Lord should they, the single elders, form a matrimonial alliance with the natives. And by this means the elders, who comply with this, the thing so pleasing to the Lord, and for which the Lord has promised to bless those who do it abundantly. It has been made known to one Martin Harris, who has left his wife in the state of New York," Harris was in Missouri at the time, "that he is entirely free from his wife, and he is at pleasure to take him a wife from among the Lamanites. It is easily perceived that this permission was perfectly suited to his desires. I have frequently heard him state that the Lord had made it known to him that he is as free from his wife as from any other women, and the only crime I ever heard alleged against her is she is violently opposed to Mormonism." So again, here we have this idea. This is already with Martin Harris as well, saying, "I'm free from my wife. I can marry any other women. I can do whatever I want." This is definitely an attitude that he and Joseph had.
Absolutely. And as we detail in these statements about the attitude of both Joseph and Martin Harris had about adultery, it becomes clear why Joseph would later devise the idea of celestial marriage, or the new and everlasting covenant, where God commands them to engage in adultery. This is less about God and more about the behavior of these men seeking to justify their adulterous desires and behavior. So we see in the book Wife Number 19, which honestly, I think it's a fantastic book. Sadly, I've not made it through the entire book as of this moment, but
It's long. It's really long.
it is very long. But everything I've read so far is so groundbreaking, and she does such a wonderful job of explaining the hardships and she gives very detailed descriptions. So the book Wife Number 19 was written by one of Brigham Young's wives, Annalisa Webb, and she states the wife of the prophet took no more kindly to this new doctrine of celestial marriage than did the rest of the Mormon women. and no women of them all allowed their objections to become so widely known as Mrs. Smith. She knew her husband's nature too well to believe in the divine origin of the system, and she fought it persistently during his lifetime. At one time, he had 11 young ladies living in his family as adopted daughters, to whom
That was the ruse to hide the fact that he was actually, quote, married to them. Oh, they're
exactly,
just adopted daughters.
which kind of makes it even more worse that he's calling them daughters. I don't know. Either way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So these adopted daughters, to whom he had been sealed without the knowledge of his wife. She for sure, or for, let me restart that. She for some time supposed that his object in having them was purely a charitable one. To be sure, some of them had parents living, yet there was some plausible reason always given for having them under his roof, which none of the saints dared to question. Although many of them, especially those who were growing disaffected, were dissatisfied with his reasons and suspicious of his motives. Unlike many of the Mormon women, Mrs. Smith was not one to accept a cross of this kind submissively. She by no means bowed her head, broke her heart, and silenced her lips, and allowed her husband to pursue his, another word I'm going to fail to pronounce. Awesome, yeah. Thank you. Course without opposition. I swear I practice these words. As soon as the camera's on, it's done. I apologize to everyone watching. So she forced her husband to respect her and her opinions, although he was notoriously unfaithful to her during all their married life. So these statements of Emma's discussed with the doctrine of polygamy from the beginning. She never faltered in seeking to destroy and rid the Mormon Church of this abomination, which is what caused Brigham Young to hate her viciously and claim many times that she should be damned. Once again, we got people should be damned. Brigham Young and everyone back then loved damning people.
Yep.
And we will detail the animosity between Brigham and Emma later in this podcast, because it gets insane.
Yep.
So Annalisa Webb continues on page 82. The audacity of Joseph Smith in stating as a revelation from God that David's wives and concubines were given to him of God by the hand of Nathan. In none of these things did he sin against me, in sacredly conceivable. When it is remembered that in the divinely inspired Book of Mormon is written, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines, which thing was abominable before me, saith the Lord.
There's a contradiction.
Exactly.
Because in the Book of Mormon, it says it was abominable, and then Joseph is claiming that they were given to him by God, which the Bible never says. So exactly. It's a crock of hogwash.
Seriously.
We are going to tell more of that later.
Yeah, exactly. And the Lord, however, whom Joseph served, seems to have been as inconsistent, like we just said, in many other matters, which again, we will see later on. But in the case of difficulty, Joseph was specially commissioned to restore all things.
Yeah, restore all things. Yeah, right. Restore the things that he wants to restore. So it's really important to understand that D&C 132 and in the Book of Mormon, Jacob chapter 2, verse 24, and then 26 through 28 completely contradict each other. And I know they say, oh, it was to raise up a righteous seed. Oh, well, guess what? Joseph didn't have children with any of these women. So again, he's still going against 132, right? So if you don't have any children, then there was no reason to do this. So regardless of how you try to slice it, it just doesn't work. So let's look at Jacob. So in Jacob chapter 2, we're looking at verse 24. Behold, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines, which thing was abominable before me, saith the Lord. There you have it. How could God have given these women to David and Solomon and then say it was abominable? That can't go together. So then let's move on to verse 26. Wherefore I, the Lord God, will not suffer that this people shall do like unto them of old. So he's saying, I'm not going to allow you to do this. Again, against David and Solomon. Wherefore, my brethren, hear me and hearken to the word of the Lord. For there shall not any man among you have save it be one wife, and concubines ye shall have none. Again, how much clearer can you possibly get? And then in 28, LDS people believe that this is canonized scripture, the word of God. So you can't have this be the word of God and section 132 be the word of God, because they completely contradict each other. And 28 is really important. He says, for I, the Lord God, delight in the chastity of women, and whoredoms are an abomination before me. Thus saith the Lord of hosts. Do we need to? I mean, how much more can you say about this? It is made abundantly clear that the God of the Book of Mormon is completely against the polygamy of the Old Testament and sternly commands against it. And then in D&C section 132, God then lays out an entire plan for implementing polygamy and says that he's the one that gave women to David and Solomon. It doesn't work. It's an absolute contradiction. Both of these scriptures cannot be true at the same time. Either God condemns the polygamy of David and Solomon and says that it was abominable, or he gave the women to David and Solomon, but you cannot have both. It becomes very obvious that D&C 132 was simply an effort to use God to justify Joseph's adulterous behavior. So moving on to more controversy in Joseph and Emma's marriage, and we will get back to section 132 later on. But we're going to go back to this controversy in Joseph and Emma's marriage. There was a statement of Emma actually being a latecomer to conversion into Joseph's church. Despite her eventual knowing and willing participation in the conspiracy designed to peddle Mormonism's falsehoods, there's perhaps a basic reason to suspect that Emma Hale Smith knew Joseph Smith was a fraud and then fudged to cover that up. She wouldn't join his church in the beginning, at least not right away. She did not. It appeared that getting the supposed ever faithful Emma to eventually do so was like pulling teeth. At least that's how one chronicler of Mormonism's first elect lady's behavior saw it, noting, by the early fall of 1830, there was only one person whom Joseph wanted to convert who had still not joined the church. That holdout was his wife, Emma. Why Emma refused to join Joseph's church for 6 months, we do not know. Just as we do not know whether she believed in the existence of the golden tablets or the gold plates. Mm-hmm. Kind of a big thing, you know. Really wasn't about to just jump in to his church. Yeah,
she waited 6 months, and then it continues on saying it was, of course, embarrassing for Joseph to be proselytizing for his new church while he was unable to win the soul of his own wife. Under considerable pressure from Joseph, the woman who had recorded the first words of the Book of Mormon finally became a Mormon herself. It's another interesting fact that Emma was reluctant to join her own husband's church. We certainly do not know her reasons, but it does suggest that she had reservations about the truth or validity of the Mormon church, of this religion that Joseph was trying to start. Her actions after Joseph's death add further credence to the idea that she did not truly believe in Joseph's new religion, because she remained in Nauvoo after his death and supported her son, Joseph Smith III, in founding the RLDS Church, which was adamantly opposed to polygamy. And she was never sealed to any of her children during her lifetime. And we're going to go into more detail about this towards the end of the podcast.
Yep.
And none of her surviving children were ever active members of their father's church. And they were also not sealed to their own spouses during their lifetimes. The evidence that Emma did not believe that this was the one true church is quite profound. And like I said, we will provide more of these details towards the end of the podcast. But let's go ahead and jump back to section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, because this clearly shows the arrogance and hostility that Joseph had towards Emma and her her disdain for his adulterous affairs. So let's just go over a few verses in D&C 132. And we're going to start out with verse 51. It states, "Verily I say unto you, a commandment." Wow, okay, we got a commandment here.
Yep.
"A commandment I give unto mine handmaid, Emma Smith, your wife, whom I have given unto you, that she stay herself and partake not of that which I commanded you to offer unto her. For I did it, saith the Lord, to prove you all, as I did Abraham, and that I might require an offering at your hand by covenant and sacrifice." So, what is Joseph talking about? That she stay herself and partake not that which I commanded you to offer unto her? So, real quick, William Law offers us a possible explanation in a letter published in the Salt Lake City Tribune in 1887. Joseph Smith never purposed anything of the kind to me or to my wife. Both he and Emma knew our sentiments in relation to spiritual wives and polygamy, knew that we were immovably opposed to polygamy in any and every form. So 100% against polygamy. But Law did believe that Joseph offered to furnish his wife, Emma, with a substitute for him by way of compensation for his neglect of her, on condition that she would stop her opposition to polygamy and permit him to enjoy his young wives in peace and keep some of them in the house. So, okay, there's a lot to unpack in William Law's letter here.
Yep.
So, basically saying, providing Emma with a substitute for him, and so he can enjoy his young wives in peace. That's just disgusting.
It is. Yeah, we have there's several pieces of evidence that Emma was demanding to be able to have a spiritual husband and this type of a thing, and then later she eventually just ends up getting property and some other things, and which we will detail again later. But we have another witness to this idea that Emma wanted to indulge herself in adultery. And this is in a book by Joseph H. Jackson. And it says, "I have related above, 15th of January, 1844, that Joe informed me in conversation that he had been endeavoring for some 2 months to get Mrs. William Law for a spiritual wife. He said that he had used every argument in his power to convince her of the correctness of his doctrine, but could not succeed. I then asked him how he dare preach such doctrines to virtuous and well-meaning females in the name of the Lord, and in relation to the particular course he was pursuing towards Mrs. Law. I remarked that it astonished me to see him profess so great friendship for Law, William Law, while at the same time he was endeavoring to destroy his happiness by the seduction of his wife. To this he replied that Law was trying to seduce Emma, and he was determined to beat him." Speaking of Emma, Joseph says, "She even would not be true to him if she could get a chance. But," said he, "I watch her close and mean to so long as I live." I then asked him if he could blame Law if he should seduce Emma. He seemed to think that Law would not do such a thing. I then reminded him that he had just said that Law had tried to seduce Emma in order to justify his own proceedings with Law's wife. But now he contradicted himself by expressing too much confidence in William Law. To get out of this dilemma, he said that the truth was Emma wanted William Law, for a spiritual husband, and that she urged a reason that as he had so many spiritual wives, she thought it but fair that she should at least have one man spiritually sealed up to her, and that she wanted Law because he was such a sweet little man. He then tried to persuade me to aid him in his purposes on Mrs. Law, and said that he would employ any stratagem in order to accomplish his object, and went on to say that he and Emma had both tried to persuade her of the correctness of the doctrine, but that she would not believe it to be of God. I told him that he must carry his plot himself, for I would have nothing to do with such things. but remarked that if all parties were agreed, that he and Law had better swap wives. To which he replied, that was all Emma wanted. Okay, I just want to say, this man is suggesting that Joseph and William Law swap wives, to which Joseph says that's what Emma wanted. I'm just saying. So I find that very interesting. From these accounts, though, we can easily see that Emma was in fact trying to indulge herself on some level due to Joseph's constant adulterous affairs. And we'll also see that Emma was also trying to seduce another man later on. Joseph then dictates this so-called revelation found in D&C 132 to claim that God forbids Emma from indulging herself and that she must cleave to Joseph only, but she must accept all the women that God gives to Joseph or be destroyed. So let's continue with D&C 132.
Yeah, the timing of all this is insane. Where, oh, God's like, oh, Joseph, you have as many wives as you want. Emma, on the other hand, sorry, you're stuck with this pervert. Whoops,
Yeah.
sorry. Like, it's insane. But yeah, jumping back to D&C 132, we're now going to go over verses 52 through 57. It's 52 starts with, and let mine handmaid Emma Smith receive all those that have been given unto my servant Joseph, and who are, I am so sorry, I cannot pronounce, virtuous, thank you so much, and pure before me, I promise I know how to pronounce that word, and those who are not pure and have said they were pure shall be destroyed, saith the Lord God. For I am the Lord God, and ye shall obey my voice, and I give unto my servant Joseph that he shall be made ruler over many things, for he hath been faithful over a few things, from henceforth I will strengthen him. And I command my handmaid Emma Smith to abide and cleave unto my servant Joseph, and to none else. But if she will not,
he's reaffirming it right there.
Exactly.
He keeps saying Joseph can have all he wants, but Emma, yeah, he keeps reaffirming that. So you kind of, even in this scripture itself, you can see how Joseph is trying to use God to say, Emma, you can't do this. Mm-hmm. It's very clear.
Exactly.
So anyway, go on.
It continues on with, but if she will not abide this covenant, she shall be destroyed. So exactly what you're saying, reaffirming the fact that, oh, Emma, no one else. If you do try to do that, oh, you're destroyed. I'm sorry. Like, it's so hypocritical. Like, I don't know. And continues on, saith the Lord, for I am the Lord thy God, and will destroy her if she abide not in my law. So once again, we got more destruction of Emma. It's insane. It continues on in 55. But if she will not abide in this commandment, then shall my servant Joseph do all things for her, even as he hath said, and I will bless him and multiply him, and give unto him 100-fold in this world, of fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, houses and lands, wives and children, and crowns of eternal lives in the eternal worlds. And again, verily I say, let mine handmaid forgive my servant Joseph of his trespasses, and then shall she be forgiven of her trespasses, wherein she has trespassed against me, and I, the Lord thy God, will bless her and multiply her, and make her heart to rejoice. And again, I say, let not my servant Joseph put his property out of his hands, lest an enemy come and destroy him. For Satan seeketh to destroy. For I am the Lord thy God, and he is my servant. And behold, lo, I am with him, as I was with Abraham thy father, even unto his exaltation and glory.
So I want to point out here really quick, when it says, let my servant Joseph not put property out of his hands, it's because Emma was asking Joseph to sign deed property over into her name. And we'll detail that later on. So you can see in the scripture, Joseph is just detailing out everything that Emma was trying to do and trying to say that God is commanding her not to, or she'll be destroyed. So he's trying to use God to control Emma and put her in her place so that he can do what he wants to do. It's pretty sick. This section of scripture is just disgusting.
No wonder that she burned the original section 132, because
yeah, exactly.
This is disgusting.
Yeah.
And as we see, Joseph had used his, again, supposed religion or revelation from God to claim that he was justified in all of his adulterous affairs, and if Emma didn't accept all of them, she was the one who was going to be destroyed. So basically, God's just going to ignore the commandments of don't commit adultery for Joseph, and if Emma's not okay with that, she's going to be destroyed. This is ridiculous. This does not sound like God at all. And it sounds like Joseph is simply trying to justify himself in this gross adultery and convince the women he wanted to indulge himself with and his wife that this was all condoned by God. And God's like, you know what, Joseph, this is okay for you. You can commit adultery. It's fine. Like, no. In Mormon Enigma on page 169, it continues to clearly spell out the painful situation that not only Emma was in, but many of Joseph's wives had found themselves in. So we're going to start with Emily Partridge, wrote her experience as a teenage bride of Joseph Smith, living under the same roof as Emma.
Which is horrible.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
The presence of some of Joseph's wives under her roof nagged at her. She continued to confront Joseph with the issue. Emily Partridge was the only plural wife who recounted the events. She said that interviews with Joseph, her sister, herself, and Emma occurred frequently.
Yeah. So, to be clear, Emily and her sister both were teenage girls that were married to Joseph while they were living in Joseph and Emma's house. So Emily Partridge actually wrote her own book, and this is what she said happened to her while she was living in Joseph and Emma's home. She was a teenage girl, mind you. Just keep that in mind. So this is what Emily says. She sent for us one day to come to her room. Joseph was present, looking like a martyr. Emma said some very hard things. Joseph should give us up or blood would flow. She would rather her blood would run pure than be polluted in this manner. So Emma, she does not mince words here. She has had enough of Joseph's adultery with young teenage girls, and she is threatening and insinuating some sort of violence or suicide here. She's saying blood would flow. She's saying she would rather her blood run pure than be polluted by this. So she is being very, very, very strong in what she's saying. It's clear that Emma is very upset by this. She is not in support of what is happening. And then Emily continues in her book. Emma insisted that we should promise to break our marriage covenants that we had made before God. So here we are. Emma is wanting this marriage broken up with these two teenage sisters. Joseph asked her if we made her this promise to break up the marriage that she required, if she would cease to trouble us and not persist in our marrying someone else. She made the promise. Joseph came to us and shook hands with us, and the understanding was that all was ended between us. For I, for one, meant to keep the promise I was forced to make. There's a lot in here. Emma is wanting this marriage broken up between Joseph and these two teenage girls. And this is Emily stating this firsthand account that Emma wanted this done. Then Joseph shakes hands with them with an understanding that it was all ended between them. How easy is this supposed divorce happening? That they just shake hands and they're like, okay, it's all ended. There's no real validity to any of this. But he had so manipulated these teenage girls that she's saying, I, for one, meant to keep the promise I was forced to make. She said forced to make. Emma entered as Joseph went out of the room. She questions Emily about what Joseph said to her. And then Emma says, you might as well tell me. I'm determined that a stop shall be put to these things. And I want you to tell me what he says to you. And then Emily says, I shall not tell you. He can say what he pleases to me, and I shall not report it to you. There has been mischief enough made by doing that. I am sick of these things as you can be. The situation became intolerable for both Emma, Emily, and Eliza Partridge, these teenage girls. Emily again says, Emma could not rest till she got us out of the house, and then she was not satisfied but wanted us to leave the city. So I want you to realize that apologists use the fact that they say Emma agreed to allow Joseph to marry these two girls. Joseph married them behind her back, and then she later agreed. Clearly, that is not what is happening here. She offered to give us money to pay our expenses if we would go. We consulted Joseph. He said we might make a visit to some of our relatives who were living up the river 200 or 300 miles. So we agreed to go, and she gave us $10. Joseph said it was insufficient for us not to go, so we gave it up and returned the money to Emma. So Emily also testified concerning Emma's reaction the next day. Emma, consented to the marriage at the time, then she was bitter after that. After the next day, you might say she was bitter. So Emily wrote these words in her own book. These are Emily's own words, and it clearly and distinctly details the turmoil, the pain, the struggle that these women were put through because of Joseph's predatory sexual behavior towards underage girls and all of his adulterous behavior all together. Joseph and Emma's marriage was nothing like the Hallmark style romance story that the LDS Church tries to paint for you. It is nothing like that at all. Joseph left a wake of pain and suffering due to his treatment of women that continues today with the church's spiritual polygamy that continues on in Mormon temples. And we will detail the suffering of women who've been denied cancellation of sealings to ex-husbands, the church giving clearance for men to be sealed to another wife against his ex-wife's permission or wishes, including a host of other harmful sealing practices. And in fact, my own grandmother went through this, so I've seen these polygamous sealing practices and the damage that they cause in families firsthand, and it's still to this day terrible.
It is really terrible. And we can continue to see that. So we got George A. Smith's wife, Bathsheba, remembered Emma saying, "Your husbands are going to take more wives, and unless you consent to it, you must put your foot down and keep it there." Bathsheba added that much more was said in regard to plural marriage at the time by Emma Smith, who seemed opposed to the principle. Continuing, in 1876, John Taylor recalled Emma Smith at first professed having faith in the revelation on celestial marriage, but afterwards forsook it, using her influence to pervert the minds of the sisters and set them against it. When I met Joseph, I said, "Brother Joseph, do you know that Sister Emma has been talking thus, and so to my wife, and telling her such and such things, and said that you have denied the revelation yourself?" Joseph responded to John Taylor, "Brother, Sister Emma would dethrone Jehovah himself if she could, for the accomplishment of her purposes." So Emma is clearly very outspoken about her opposition to celestial marriage or polygamy, and it is well documented that she fought fervently against it all of Joseph's life. A young woman from Carthage reported, "My sister went into the hotel parlor to await the call to breakfast. 10 or 12 young women were assembled here, laughing and talking. Mrs. Emma Smith presently joined them, and recognizing my sister, whom she had met before, entered into conversation with her. Upon my sister asking, 'Mrs. Smith, where does your church get this doctrine of spiritual wives?' Her face flushed scarlet, and her eyes blazed as she said, 'Straight from hell, madam.'" Like, she is...
Yeah, it was straight from hell. Let's be real.
Seriously. Like, Emma's not mincing words at all here. And yeah, and I agree, it is straight from hell. No. And despite what the church wants people to believe about Joseph and Emma's relationship, it was anything but undying romantic love, which is the story that the church tries to portray. She was definitely not his beloved Emma, like the church tries to make her out to be.
That just makes me cringe. I remember watching the Legacy movie in the 90s up in Salt Lake, and they just paint it as this absolute like love story, like almost sickening love story. And when you find out the truth, it just makes your stomach turn because it's such a lie.
Seriously, the sheer amount of adultery and heartache that Joseph caused her, clearly and plainly detailed in many accounts, is enough to show that the only beloved that Joseph had was himself.
100%.
It's no secret that Emma was very opposed to polygamy And we have statements from church leaders that describe this in detail. So first, we have a statement made by Brigham Young, which was recorded in the minutes of a meeting held in Nauvoo, Illinois on December 30th, 1845. So this was directly from Brigham Young.
Oh yeah, Brigham Young, dude. They try to say that he had some fiery rhetoric. I'm like, oh, listen, it was way more than fiery rhetoric. Okay, so Brigham Young in this is what he says. To my certain knowledge, Emma Smith is one of the damnedest liars I know of on this earth. Yet there is no good thing I would refuse to do for her if she would only be a righteous woman. Remember, being a righteous woman means she needs to submit to polygamy. I just want to insert that here. But she will continue in her wickedness. Not 6 months before the death of Joseph, he called his wife Emma into a secret council, and there he told her the truth and called upon her to deny it if she could. He told her that the judgments of God would come upon her forthwith if she did not repent. He told her of the time she undertook to poison him. And he told her that she was a child of hell and literally the most wicked woman on this earth, that there was not one more wicked than she. He told her where she got the poison and how she put it in a cup of coffee, which I find really interesting. He was drinking coffee, right? Said he, you got that poison from so-and-so and drank it. And I drank it, but you could not kill me. When it entered his stomach, he went to the door and threw it off. He spoke to her in that council in a very severe manner, and she never said one word in reply. I have witnesses of this scene all around who can testify that I am now telling the truth. Twice she undertook to kill him. Okay. So I want you to realize this was published in the Deseret News Weekly. This was at a semi-annual conference on October 1866. Okay. So he is literally saying Emma Smith tried to kill Joseph twice. Okay. And not only that, he says he has a lot of witnesses to this that can testify that it is true. Then he details in this semi-annual conference the horrific way in which Joseph spoke to Emma, calling her a child of hell, the most wicked woman on this earth. There is not one more wicked than she. This is a horrible way to speak to your wife. And the reality is he's speaking to her this way, first of all, because she has refused polygamy their entire marriage and been adamantly opposed to it. And then she tries to poison him, which honestly, I wish she had. I mean, I don't blame this woman at all for the horrific way that this man behaved. By today's standard, a man doing those kinds of things with underage girls, he would be locked up. Okay. Yeah. Brigham then goes on to claim that he has witnesses all around to the fact that Emma tried to kill Joseph. This is a bold statement to be making in a semi-annual conference, but it clearly details the sad reality that Emma was pushed beyond her limits with Joseph's adulterous behavior and the heart-wrenching suffering that he constantly put her through. This is not a loving marriage. Okay, when we have Brigham Young and all these people claiming that she tried to kill him, let's be real, she'd been pushed beyond her limits. And this is not the only statement. So let's continue. Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, Volume 17, page 159. Brigham Young is discussing Emma's opposition to plural marriage, and he says, Emma took the revelation when Joseph was alive and put it in her pocket and said she would not accept it at all, and she burned it up. So here we have Brigham Young in the Journal of Discourses stating to us that she burned it up. Well, what is he referencing? This statement is in reference to section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where Joseph claims God dictates how to implement polygamy and then threatens Emma that she'll be destroyed if she doesn't accept all the women that God gives to Joseph. This is the statement where Brigham Young is saying she burned it. And then we move on to William Marks. He was Nauvoo's state president. So this is his statement in 1872. He was a close associate of Joseph Smith, and he gave this statement reflecting Emma's opposition to polygamy. And he said, when the doctrine of polygamy was introduced into the church as a principle of exaltation, I want to point that out, It was introduced as a principle of exaltation. You don't get salvation if you don't do it. Emma Smith, the wife of Joseph, firmly opposed it. So we have a lot of leaders of the church plainly stating that Emma was adamantly opposed to this whole thing.
Yeah, and we got John Taylor now in the Journal of Discourses, volume 24, page 317. So John Taylor was a close associate of Joseph Smith and was a future president of the LDS Church. And he commented on Emma's opposition, saying Emma was not a believer in the revelation on celestial marriage. And we have plenty of witnesses to the fact that Emma did not believe that polygamy was of God, and she was adamantly opposed to it. We've got a letter from Benjamin F. Johnson in 1903. And so Benjamin F. Johnson was an early Mormon and a close friend of Joseph Smith, and he mentioned Emma's jealousy. Emma was terribly severe on Joseph, and he did not know what to do. One thing we can take away from these statements is that Emma was not Joseph's loving and devoted wife, who just took his adulterous relationship sitting down. It was very well known that not only did Emma oppose it, she was angry and took extreme measures to rid herself of Joseph's adulterous lifestyle to the point of even trying to kill him. Now we've got a statement from Lucy Walker in 1902. Lucy Walker was one of Joseph's plural wives, and she described Emma's reaction to the plural marriage. Emma took a position that if Joseph would agree to relinquish all others, she would cleave to him, otherwise she would leave him. There's no way to deny that Emma was strongly opposed to Joseph's behavior and that it caused her immense pain and suffering. Their marriage was one of constant betrayal, marrying her friends behind her back, marrying underage girls in their home. Emma did not have a peaceful life, and it had nothing to do with religion and everything to do, and Joseph's despicable behavior towards women. So there is let's say, a controversial letter from Emma Smith published in the New York Sun in December of 1845, and it contains a shocking statement where Emma allegedly said, "I must now say that I have never for a moment believed in what my husband called his apparitions and revelations, that I thought him laboring under a diseased mind." So this letter, if authentic, would have been quite a bombshell to the new church. The LDS Church claims that Emma wrote a letter to the editor claiming that this was a forgery and she did not write it. However, the newspaper New York Sun never published a rebuttal to that initial letter, to that initial statement.
Yeah, and I think, if we didn't have any evidence of Emma being bothered or upset by anything that Joseph was doing, if she, then I could say this was probably a forgery and move on. The problem is, you look at Brigham Young's statement, you look at John Taylor's statement, you look at the stake president's statement, you look at all these statements, you look at the statements of Joseph Smith's other wives, like Emma Partridge and Lucy Rucker, all these other women that are saying that Emma was saying blood is going to flow. Emma poisoned him. I mean, really? Is it really all that far-fetched that Emma would say something like this? I don't think it is. But we'll let you decide. But you can see all of these detailed accounts that we've presented so far. This letter to the New York Sun, it does accurately portray Emma's feelings, at least about polygamy. She was very opposed to it, and it's very plainly obvious. So we've given reference to public statements made by Brigham Young that Emma tried to poison Joseph Smith. So one can hardly claim that this letter did not in any way reflect how Emma felt. But regardless of whether it's authentic or not, we wanted to include this and then just allow you to decide what you think, if it is or if it was a forgery. We're not going to claim either way. So I wouldn't put it past the church leaders to demand that she recant this letter and intimidate her with threats. We We've detailed about the Danites in the past. So if you want more information about that, their intimidation and threats, they were not hollow. So anyway, let's moving on. In an intimate chronicle, the Journals of William Clayton, edited by George D. Smith. So again, these are from the Journals of William Clayton. There are entries in his journal that discuss the marital stress between Joseph and Emma, particularly around the issue of polygamy, which seems to be one of the main issues that she had. These journals provide a firsthand look at the tensions that arose as Joseph introduced this practice of God-sanctioned adultery. Emma's opposition to polygamy caused a lot of strain in their marriage, and Clayton, who was Joseph's scribe for a time, recorded many of these difficult moments between the two of them. Additionally, there are references to Emma Smith allegedly making romantic advances towards William Clayton. So now we have another issue with Emma wanting another man. And this is just part of this entire complex and strained marital dynamic with Joseph. This claim suggests that Emma, possibly out of jealousy or frustration with Joseph's other relationships, might have attempted to involve Clayton in her own efforts to retaliate against Joseph. So for more detailed information, you might want to take a look at the source materials of Clayton's journal yourself, particularly in the Intimate Chronicle. And that can provide you with more context and specific entries on these issues. We're just going to detail some of them here, and especially for time's sake. So the first one before we get into William Clayton's journals, though, is from Joseph Smith's own journal. So we talked about how Brigham Young said that Emma had tried to poison Joseph, tried to kill him more than once. This is from Joseph Smith's journal on Sunday, November 5th, 1843. And this is what he says. Rode out with my mother and others for her health, was taken suddenly sick at the dinner table, went to the door and vomited all dinner, jaws dislocated and raised fresh blood, every symptom of poison. The interesting thing is, this is exactly what Brigham Young said. Brigham Young said he went to the door and threw it off or vomited, and that it was Emma that had tried to poison him. So you can see how Joseph Smith's journal and Brigham Young's statement corroborate each other, that this was, in fact, Emma trying to poison him. So let's move on to William Clayton's journals. On the morning of July 12th, 1843, Joseph and Hiram Smith came into the office in the upper story of the brick store on the bank of the Mississippi River. And they were talking on the subject of plural marriage. Hiram said to Joseph, if you will write the revelation on celestial marriage, I will take it and read it to Emma. And I believe I can convince her of its truth. So here's Hiram saying, I can convince Emma. I'll take it to her. I can convince her, and you will hereafter have peace. Joseph smiled and remarked, you do not know Emma as well as I do. Hiram repeated his opinion and further remarked, the doctrine is so plain, I can convince any reasonable man or woman of its truth, purity, and heavenly origin. Or words to their effect. So here's Hiram saying, I can convince Emma and you'll be fine.
Yeah. And then Joseph then said, well, I will write the revelation and we will see. He then requested me to get paper and prepare to write. Hiram very urgently requested Joseph to write the revelation by means of the Urim and Thummim. But Joseph, in reply, said he did not need to, for he knew the revelation perfectly from beginning to end.
If it's a revelation, how does he know it perfectly? He hasn't got it yet. Yeah, Joseph, he knows it perfectly because he knows what he wants to say.
Exactly. Joseph and Hiram then sat down. Joseph commenced to dictate the revelation on celestial marriage, and I wrote it, sentence by sentence, as he dictated. After the whole was written, Joseph asked me to read it through, slowly and carefully, which I did, and he pronounced it correct. He then remarked that there was much more that he could write on the same subject, but what was written was sufficient. So Joseph F. Smith reported, after it was done, Joseph said that there is enough for the present, but I have a great deal more, which would be given hereafter. And it doesn't appear that any additional information was later given, If it was not recorded. And Joseph simply dictated a supposed revelation to his brother to try to convince his wife that his adulterous behavior was condoned by God. And there was nothing supernatural or godly about this dictation. It was a mere ruse to get Emma to leave Joseph alone and let him do as he pleased. So we'll continue on with William Clayton's journal. It says, Hiram then took the revelation, read it to Emma. Joseph remained with me in the office until Hiram returned. When he came back, Joseph asked him how he had succeeded. Hiram replied that he had never received a more severe talking to in his life, and that Emma was very bitter and full of resentment and anger.
I love that. He never received a more severe talking to in his life. Go, Emma.
Seriously. And you can see here that Emma was extremely angry and did not accept polygamy in any way, shape, or form. And can you blame her? This is such an awful thing that Joseph is claiming God gave him permission to have these terrible and adulterous relationships, a decent chunk of which were with young underage girls, which is disgusting.
Yeah.
The revelation Joseph claimed to have is now section 132 in the Doctrine of Covenants, and as detailed in the historical record in July of 1887, the original document penned by Clayton was destroyed either by Emma or by Joseph at Emma's bidding. Emma would not have destroyed or ordered it to be destroyed if she had truly believed this was a revelation from God. The William Clayton's journal continues. Evidently, the second part of the agreement was demanded by Emma to ensure that if anything had happened to Joseph or their marriage, she would be financially supported. William Clayton recorded that hours after Emma rejected Hiram and the revelation, Joseph told me to deed all the unencumbered lots to Emma and the children. He appears much troubled about Emma. So basically, Emma's like, okay, if anything happens, I want support. I need to support my kids. But then he, in this case, talking about Emma, appeared much troubled about Emma. Like, I don't know. It's
she had been demanding property of Joseph, and that's why it was in 132.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see here, after the 132, Emma's realizing like this marriage, and I think she knew that Joseph was in pretty deep. Mm-hmm. They were obviously in a lot of debt to a lot of creditors, as we know. But she basically is thinking, if there's something that's going to happen to their marriage, as William said, she wants the unencumbered lots. She basically wants a way to support herself. So the day after this supposed section 132 revelation on polygamy was recorded, Clayton wrote in his journal, "This a.m. Joseph sent for me, and when I arrived, he called me up into his private room with Emma, and there stated an agreement that they had mutually entered into. They both stated their feelings on many subjects and wept considerable." This is not a happy situation. Clearly, Emma is really unhappy in the marriage, that there's a lot going on. They are both crying. And he says, "Oh, may the Lord soften her heart that she may be willing to keep and abide his holy law." The holy law is polygamy, which Emma, she was not going to do it. So 2 days later, Clayton penned made deed for half of the steamboat, the Maid of Iowa, from Joseph to Emma, and also deeded to Emma over 60 city lots. This is a significant amount of stuff. Now, I know the LDS Church tries to tell you that they were just poor and what they were not. So she receives half of their steamboat and 60 city lots. I think this is very telling that he tries to tell her that this, polygamous, adulterous stuff is of God. Emma's not having any of it, and she wants the lots, and she wants some money to provide for herself. She definitely did not take this supposed revelation sitting down, and is obviously demanding things from Joseph. There's no way to know her intentions with this property, but clearly there was serious trouble in their marriage after Joseph tried to shove this supposed revelation in her face. William Law remembered that on one occasion, Emma told him, Joe and I have settled our troubles on the basis of equal rights. So essentially, she's just saying she's just trying to get something for herself out of all of this mess. And also, LDS historian Richard Bushman assessed the next day after Emma was shown the revelation, Joseph and Emma talked for hours. Clayton was called into the room near the end to hear an agreement they had mutually entered into. They both stated their feelings on many subjects, just like we just said before. They were in an impossible position. Joseph caught between his revelation and his wife. Emma between a practice she detested and belief in her husband. The agreement represented some kind of compromise. So I want to detail here, though, this was a statement by an LDS historian. He is trying to offer a faithful explanation for this transfer of property to Emma and claiming that, oh, Joseph is just caught between a rock and a hard place between God and his wife. And this is BS. This is BS. Joseph was caught between his desire for his licentious lifestyle and the anger of his wife. It had nothing, God was not a part of this. But of course, you know, someone who made a faithful explanation is going to claim that, oh, he doesn't know what to do because God told him to do this. This is just ridiculous. Again, as always, apologists have to do a lot of mental gymnastics in order to make this work.
Yeah.
According to the evidence, Joseph was not caught between anything. I don't believe for 1 minute that this deviant behavior was of God, and Emma clearly did not either. If Emma truly believed this was of God, I don't think that she would have been trying to kill Joseph over it. So it's just, and if she thought Joseph was a prophet of God, I mean, you're probably going to get in a lot of trouble for trying to kill a prophet of God. I don't know. But Clayton goes on to detail the suffering of many people under Joseph's demand for others to live an adulterous lifestyle under the guise of approval from God as well. And he says, quote, for some of Smith's followers, plural marriage was a very heavy thing for us to meet, for we generally professed to be and were pure men. Hello. He was even saying this was a heavy thing for a lot of men that Joseph was trying to impose this upon. Clayton's journal captures the reaction of Emma on the day of the revelation as well, where he says, after it was wrote, Joseph and Hiram presented it and read it to Emma, who said she did not believe a word of it and appeared very rebellious.
And shortly before the revelation, Clayton had recorded a domestic dispute between Joseph and Emma, in which she threatened to draw him into a triangle. The prophet warning Clayton that Emma wanted to lay a snare for him and indulge herself with him. So here we've got another incident where Emma is threatening violence against Joseph, witnessed and recorded by William Clayton in his journal. Emma did not believe that this was of God, and she was very vocal and very outspoken about her position on the matter. Clayton worried that he might be cut off from celestial glory if he accepted any advances from Emma. In the month following the revelation, Smith told Clayton that he was afraid Emma might divorce him. On August 21st, 1843, Clayton was again drawn into the Smiths' domestic problems when Emma questioned him about 2 letters from Eliza R. Snow, Joseph's plural wife, for over a year.
By the way, Eliza R. Snow was a very good friend of Emma's and had married Joseph behind her back, just so you know.
Yeah. And Clayton had assured her that he had not delivered the letters that she had found in her husband's pockets. So here we've got several specific statements in William Clayton's journal about the marital strife that Joseph and Emma suffered in their marriage. Well, I guess mostly Emma suffered here.
Yeah.
So Emma declares that she does not believe a word of this polygamy revelation. Emma was considered rebellious against it. William Clayton records a domestic dispute between Joseph and Emma. Emma threatened to draw Joseph into a triangle. And Joseph,
probably like draw and quartering someone that we would talk about today, I guess. I don't know.
I guess so.
We draw and quarter now. They drew into a triangle back then. I don't know.
Joseph warned William Clayton that Emma had threatened to try to seduce Clayton and indulge herself as Joseph had with other women. I'm sorry, but nothing about this story sounds like Emma was in support of Joseph's behavior with other women. Nor did she at any time indicate that during Joseph's life that she believed this was of God. And it sounds like anything but marital bliss to me. Like this sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And so let's move on to another underage girl who was coerced into marrying Joseph after the death of her mother and father, or after the death of her mother and her father was sent on a mission. Lucy was brought into the Smith home while her father was sent on a mission. Lucy Walker helped Emma with housework and attended school. Lucy was coerced into marrying Joseph, along with her journal entries of the gut-wrenching suffering his proposal caused her. Okay, so I want you to remember, Lucy Walker here, she was coerced into marrying Joseph when she's only 16 years old.
Yep, she was 16. And we are not detailing all of her journal entries here, but I would highly recommend that you watch the episode on polygamy because it is absolutely horrific that Lucy is talking about being alone. Her mother had just passed away, and then Joseph sent her father on a mission, and she was living in the Smith's house and being heavily pressured to marry Joseph as a 16-year-old girl. It's awful. And she's crying, saying, oh, how she wished her mother was with her to help her. It's just awful. So anyway, William Clayton actually officiated at Joseph's wedding to 16-year-old Lucy while Emma was buying supplies in St. Louis, Missouri. So very clear that Joseph was doing this behind Emma's back, and this was a very underage girl. Lucy, as I said, 16 years old. Her mother just passed away. Joseph sent her father on a mission, and when Emma is off in St. Louis, Missouri buying supplies, Joseph marries the girl. This is absolutely disgusting that Joseph would marry an underage girl who is grieving the death of her mother. And literally right after this, her father gets sent on a mission. This is not the behavior of a loving husband. This is the behavior of a sexual predator. Emily Partridge, who we discussed earlier, wrote in her autobiography that she became Smith's wife on March 4th, 1843. And then just a few days later, on March 8th, her sister Eliza Partridge followed suit and was married to Joseph as well. What on earth? Two teenage girls being married to an already married older man. And both of these were also without the knowledge of Emma Smith. Emily further wrote that 2 months afterwards, Emma consented to give her husband 2 wives, provided he would give her the privilege of choosing them. She accordingly chose my sister Eliza and myself. To save the family trouble, Brother Joseph thought it best to have another ceremony performed. So they performed a fake ceremony 2 months later to hide the fact that they had done it behind Emma's back prior to this. So on the 11th of May, 1843, they were sealed to Joseph for a second time in Emma's presence. Now, she says she gave her free and full consent, but from that very hour, however, Emma was our bitter enemy. So is that really consent if Emma then becomes their bitter enemy afterwards? That doesn't sound like consent to me. Full consent would mean that Emma was entirely in approval and she would have treated these young girls exactly the same as she had done before if she was totally fine with it. The fact that Emma is their, quote, bitter enemy afterwards does not in any way insinuate that Emma truly and honestly consented to this. So let's go back to William Clayton's journals. We go to June 23rd, 1843. This AM, President Joseph took me and conversed considerable concerning some delicate matters. Said Emma wanted to lay snare for me. He told me last night of this and said that he had felt troubled. He said Emma had treated him coldly and badly since I came, and he knew she was disposed to be revenged on him for some things. She thought that if he would indulge himself, she would too. He cautioned me very kindly, for which I felt thankful. Okay, so here we are. He is writing in his journal that Joseph directly told him that Emma was trying to commit adultery with him to seduce him. and that she wanted revenge on Joseph Smith. And that she was treating him very coldly. Well, obviously she is. Joseph is being an absolute creep. He said Robert Thompson professed great friendship for him, but he gave away to temptation and he had to die. Now, this we searched high and low, and we could not find the information about this. It sounds very much like a day-night situation where Robert Thompson professed great friendship for Joseph Smith, but then gave way to temptation and he had to die. We don't know what happened. We were not able to find any records on this man. We'll leave it up to you to decide what you think that means. Also, Brother Newell Knight, he gave him one, but he went to loose conduct and he could not save him. Don't know what that means. Sounds like he gave him one wife and he went to loose conduct, and whatever it means, he couldn't save him. I don't know. Also, Brigham Young had transgressed his covenant, and he pled with the Lord to spare him this end, and he did so. Otherwise, he would have died. Why are we talking about people transgressing and having to die? This is in William Clayton's journals, talking about men giving away to temptation and then having to die. I don't know. It says Brigham denied having transgressed. He said, if I would do right by him and abide his counsel, he would save my life while he lived. I feel desirous to do right and would rather die than lose my interest in the celestial kingdom. Very interesting.
Yeah, here we've got another journal entry confirming the marital strife between Emma and Joseph. Emma is threatening to indulge herself in adultery if Joseph was going to do so. If you're going to do it, I'm going to do it. Emma is treating Joseph coldly and badly, which is obviously no surprise given his horrific sexual indiscretions with underage girls, married women, and Emma's friends. The other point of interest here is the indication that a man by the name of Robert Thompson gave way to a temptation and he had to die. What? Like we mentioned earlier, it may sound like another day-night situation here. And we did a whole video on the day-nights because they did so many horrific things. So definitely go check our episode on the day-nights. And also here, why does it say that Brigham Young transgressed his covenant because Joseph pled with the Lord to spare him, otherwise he would have died? What on earth is William referencing here? I'm not going to speculate, but I'm going to leave it up to you guys to decide what you think is going on here. So William Clayton's journal continues on July 12th, 1843. It says, this AM I wrote a revelation consisting of 10 pages on the order of the priesthood, showing the designs in Moses, Abraham, David, and Solomon having many wives and concubines. After it was wrote, Presidents Joseph and Hiram presented it and read it to Emma, who said she did not believe a word of it and appeared very rebellious. Joseph told me to deed all the unencumbered lots to Emma and the children. He appears much troubled about Emma. So, also we've got on August 3rd, 1843, at President Joseph's conversed about William Law and Emma. At this point, Emma Smith and William Law were formidable opponents of plural marriage. And his last entry that we detail indicates Joseph being bothered by the fact that Emma and William Law are, quote, formidable opponents to the doctrine on plural marriage. We went over Brigham Young's public claim that Emma tried to poison Joseph, but there are also many other statements of individuals about her attempts to kill Joseph by poisoning him. So first up, we've got Lucius Hale. I'm not going to try to pronounce that first word. I know I'm going to butcher it. This comes from the journal, from his journal on page 3. And this is in the LDS Church archives. And it says, a great many of the saints in these days think that the prophet's wife, Emma Hale Smith, was a bad woman, that she tried to poison the prophet. There never was a more truthful woman than Emma Smith to her husband till the prophet had made public the revelation on celestial marriage. He began to take to himself other wives. This proved a great trial to her. How many women is there in our day after 30 or 40 years? And that it does not try the hearts bear. So this, yes, I know there are lots of typos in this. I just copy and paste it directly from the journal. So
Yeah.
some of these journal entries have been made public. And it's just insane. He's directly saying Emma Hale Smith was a bad woman, that she tried to poison the prophets. You can't be more direct than that.
Yeah, so he's saying like a great many of the saints believe that she tried to poison him. But also he says that Emma was a dutiful wife until Joseph comes out and with this celestial marriage idea and starts taking other wives, which was a great trial to her. And then it's kind of confusing, but when he's saying how many women there were even 30 or 40 years later that this doctrine he came up with does not try to the heart's bear. Like he's saying that it is literally such a grievous thing to women even 30 or 40 years later. So there's a lot in that journal entry. We go on to a general conference address on October 7th, 1863. In Joseph's day, she, Emma, tried to throw me, Brother Heber, Brother Willard Richards, and the 12 apostles out of the church and tried to destroy the whole church, and I know it. Joseph himself testified before high heaven more than once that she had administered poison to him. There are men and women present today who can bear witness that more hell was never wrapped up in any human being than there is in her. She gave him too heavy a dose, and he vomited it up and was saved by faith. So here we have another general conference address talking about Emma was trying to destroy the church. This was a claim that they're making, and that Joseph testified before high heaven that she administered poison to him. So, and this is the thing that you start realizing, that the leaders of the church keep saying that there was no more hell wrapped up in any human being in her. They hated Emma because of how against polygamy that she was. And we move on to the diary of Charles Lowell Walker. This is December 17th, 1876. It was in St. George. He says, 1 p.m. I went to a meeting. Brother Snow showed in a very plain manner that the revelation on celestial marriage was given by God to Joseph prior to his death. That when Emma, Joseph's first wife, heard of the revelation, she sought the life of Joseph and tried to poison him. But he was delivered by the power of God and demanded the written revelation from him that she might destroy it. Joseph knew her heart by the power of the Holy Ghost, and to please her, sent for the revelation, but before carefully instructed Brother William Clayton to make a correct copy of it, that it might be preserved. He gave her the revelation, and no sooner has she obtained it than she threw it in the fire and burned it, thereby thinking to destroy celestial marriage from the face of the earth. And this is from his diary. So again, we have a lot of information about Emma trying to kill him and the way that she felt about all of this. There are so many witnesses to Emma throwing this fake revelation into the fire, burning it, destroying it, wanting to destroy polygamy. And then we have Alan J. Stout, who served as a bodyguard for Joseph, recounted a conversation that he overheard in the mansion house between Joseph and his tormented wife. A summary of his account states that from moments of passionate denunciation, Emma would subside into tearful repentance and acknowledge that her violent opposition to that principle was instigated by the power of darkness, that Satan was doing his utmost to destroy her, and solemnly came the prophet's inspired warning, yes, and he will accomplish your overthrow if you do not heed my counsel. But you can see here, Joseph showed her no mercy, no compassion for Emma whatsoever for the suffering that he was causing her. He constantly threatened Emma with destruction by God if she did not consent to his adulterous betrayal of her, which it was nothing short of an adulterous betrayal. There's nothing romantic about the words canonized in LDS scripture in D&C 132. These words are nothing short of abusive. After Joseph's death, Emma is seeking property for the support of herself and her children. William Clayton records in his journal on July 4th, 1844, I went to Emma's and assisted Esquire Wood to examine Joseph's affairs. The situation looks gloomy. The property is chiefly in the name of the trustee in trust, while the obligations are considered personal. Woods advised Emma to have all the deeds recorded at Carthage, for he says our recorder's office is not legal. Brother Marks is to be appointed president and trustee in trust, and this accords with Emma's feelings. Emma Smith favored Marks as a trustee in trust, probably because he had not accepted the doctrine of plural marriage and would be less inclined to offer Joseph's other wives equal inheritance. So it starts to become really sad when you see Emma trying to provide support for herself and trying to make sure that the people appointed are not going to provide other women with the inheritance that her and her children deserve.
Yeah, and according to the William Clayton's journal, much of Joseph Smith's property had been transferred into the church's name, making it difficult to distinguish among the shares due to Emma, Smith's creditors, and possibly his plural wives. Although there is some disputes as to the exact number, there's evidence that Joseph Smith had upwards of 45 plural wives.
That's out of the journals of William Clayton saying that that's what he believed, and he was Joseph's scribe. They weren't documented, but it is very likely that there were far more than 34.
Exactly. And also like we said, William Clayton's journal even says upwards like 40, 44, 45. And in today's record, like we said, there's only documentation of roughly 34 wives. But knowing Joseph, it's likely that he had more than 34. And as he did a lot of this in secret, and since it's secretive, there's no way we could have accurate documentation for all of them. Because there's no way Joseph would want all of these wives to be documented. So he's going to try to keep as many of these secret as he can. So, yeah, of course, we're not going to have documentation for every single one. And then according to LDS.org, after the death of Joseph Smith, disagreements erupted between Emma and Brigham Young, who was president of the Quorum of the 12, over the extent to which both the Smith family and the church had a right to properties in Joseph's name and were liable for his debts. So if you remember in our previous video on Joseph's criminal behavior, he was in debt about $5 million at the time of his death, which would equate to roughly about $150 million today. So Joseph was in extreme debt to creditors at the time of his death, and this placed a heavy burden on Emma and the church trying to pay off his debts and also wanting to provide for his widow Emma and their children. When most of the saints left for the Great Basin in 1846, Emma remained in Nauvoo, claiming the mansion house and whatever she could for support for her and her children. On December 23rd, 1847, Emma married Louis C. Bidman, a resident of Nauvoo who was not a member of the LDS Church. In 1860, Emma affiliated with the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was later renamed to the Community of Christ Church. Her son, Joseph Smith III, became president of that church at its founding in 1860, with his brother Alexander Hale Smith as his counselor. Emma, at this point, no longer associated herself with the LDS Church after all the saints moved to Utah. She never sought to have her children sealed to her, according to Joseph's doctrine, and she remained a member of the RLDS Church until her death. So like I said, the RLDS Church is known today as the Community of Christ, and they are very opposed to the practice of polygamy, as was Emma, and they retained a belief in the Trinity instead of the LDS theology of three separate distinct deities, indicating that Emma and Joseph's sons did not embrace the doctrine of Joseph Smith's supposed restored religion. I think that it is an absolute honor to Emma Smith, who so strongly fought for the proper treatment of women through the many years of her husband, tumultuous years of her husband's founding an adulterous religion, that today the prophet of the Community of Christ Church, founded by Emma's sons, is a woman. I believe her name is pronounced Stacy Cram, and I think it's amazing that they have a woman prophet. And I think, and like I said, that's an absolute honor to Emma Smith.
Yeah, Emma suffered a lot at the hands of Joseph and his adulterous behavior and actually his pedophilic behavior, where his youngest wife is 14 years old. So yeah, I think it's amazing. And also the Community of Christ Church began ordaining women to the priesthood on April 1st, 1984. So I find it very fitting that the church that Joseph Smith's sons started and that the one that his wife affiliated with throughout her life honors women more than any other Christian denomination in the world. After all of the oppression and suffering that Joseph Smith's religion caused to women and still does today, the legacy left behind by his sons is one of empowering women. Despite Joseph's abhorrent behavior, it seems that Emma raised respectable sons. The LDS Church tries to claim that Emma believed in Joseph Smith as a prophet in the Book of Mormon and believed in the religion that Joseph started, but I find this hard to believe for a myriad of reasons. So, number one, Emma never had any of her children sealed to her and Joseph after his death. Now, realize only one of their children was born after Emma and Joseph were sealed. They had 11 children. So 10 of those children were not technically ever sealed to them, indicating that Emma really did not see the importance of this sealing families together for eternity doctrine that Joseph claimed to receive as a revelation from God. Emma, if she believed in it, she probably would have had her children sealed to her. Number two, none of Joseph Smith's children remained members of the LDS faith. Number three, none of Joseph's children who lived into adulthood were ever sealed to their own spouses or their own children, so they clearly did not believe in this doctrine. And number four, Emma did not remain a member of the LDS faith and affiliated with the RLDS Church from its inception until her death. Emma was sealed to Joseph Smith in May of 1843. And she was around the 22nd wife to be sealed to him, which I find really odd that he really didn't really care about this whole sealing his family to him. He was more worried about getting other women. So only one of their 11 children, as I said before, was born after they were sealed together, which would mean in LDS theology, if you are sealed together, all children born after that are born in the covenant. But if you have many children and then you get sealed, those children prior to that sealing need to be sealed to you. And this was what was never completed during Emma's lifetime or any of her children's lifetime. So we're going to detail this and the dates from their family record off of Family Search. So Alvin Smith died as an infant in 1828, but he was not sealed to Joseph and Emma until 1978. That's in my lifetime. So they didn't care about having this infant that passed away being sealed to them so that they could be together forever. That just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Louisa Smith died as an infant in 1831. She was not sealed to Joseph and Emma until 1978. Again, they apparently don't care about being sealed to their own children. Thaddeus Smith died as an infant in 1831. He was not sealed to Joseph and Emma, again, until 1978. Joseph Murdoch Smith died just prior to his first birthday in 1832. He was not sealed to Joseph and Emma until 1884, which was after Joseph and Emma's lifetime. Julia Murdoch Smith was born on April 30th, 1831. She was married in 1849, and she died September 10th, 1880. So she died, that's important. She died in 1880. But her baptism into the LDS Church did not happen until December 16th, 1884. So she was never a member of the LDS Church her entire life. She was confirmed that same day. Her initiatories were done 2 days later in 1884. Her endowment and her sealing to her parents was also done in 1884. But again, it was after her death. She was sealed to her spouse June 1st, 1996. So she did not believe clearly in any of the stuff that her father, she didn't believe in her father's religion. She was never baptized into it. She never did any of the temple work, and she wasn't even sealed to her own spouse during her lifetime. It's very clear that she just did not believe in this stuff. Then we have Joseph Smith III, which obviously we know he started the RLDS Church. He was born November 6, 1832. He was married October 22nd, 1856, and he died December 10th, 1914. Well, his baptism, he was the only one that was baptized in his lifetime into the LDS Church on November 1st, 1843, which obviously he didn't take very seriously because he started his own church. His initiatories, though, were not done until 1998, which clearly shows that the temple work was not important to him. His endowment was done in 1978. He was sealed to Joseph and Emma in 1978, and he was sealed to his spouse in 1971, all of which was after his lifetime. If he really believed in his father's religion, he would have gone to the temple. He would have been sealed to his parents. He would have been sealed to his own spouse. Obviously, he did not believe in any of this because none of this was done during his lifetime. And then we move on to Frederick Granger William Smith, who was born June 20th, 1836. He was married September 13th, 1857, and he died April 13th, 1862. And again, his temple work he was not baptized until 1870, which he died in 1862. So it was years after his death that he was baptized, confirmed. And then his temple work was done initiatory and endowment in 1897. And then he was sealed to his parents in 1978 and sealed to his own spouse in 1971. So again, exact same situation. No ordinances of the LDS Church were performed until after his death. If they really valued their father's revelation on temple and sealing and all of that, they would have done it themselves, but none of them chose to do so. And then we move on to Alexander Hale Smith. Obviously, he founded the RLDS Church with his brother. So he did not believe in his father's LDS Church either. He was born June 2nd, 1838. He was married June 23rd, 1861, and he died August 11th, 1909. His temple work, so his baptism was not until 1971, baptism and confirmation. So he was never baptized into his father's religion. His initiatory was also done in 98. His endowment was in 1971. Sealing to parents was in 1978, and sealing to his own spouse was in 1971. So well after his death. So this is 3 out of 4 so far of Joseph and Emma's children who were not even baptized into their father's church during their lifetime. And then all of their ordinances are performed long after they've passed away. And I think this to me is extremely telling about the validity of Joseph Smith's claims about sealing families together when his own wife and children don't value it enough to have these ordinances performed during their lifetime. Now realize he was never sealed to his own children, but he was sealed to 7 underage girls during his lifetime. And that tells very clearly where Joseph's priorities were.
Yeah. And these late ordinances continue with Joseph Smith's other children. If you look at Don Carlos Smith, and I guess before people start commenting, yes, it does appear there's a missing slide for Alexander Hale Smith, but a lot of those dates line up with Frederick Granger William Smith. But anyway, jumping back to Don Carlos Smith. He was born on June 13th, 1840. He died on August 15th, 1841. But he wasn't sealed to his parents until January 26th, 1978. So we're over 100 years, almost 150 years after his death when he was finally sealed to his parents. So if Joseph really believed in his own sealing power, why would he not seal himself to his own children, his own baby? When people claim that his sealing to 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball was a dynastic sealing to link the Kimball family to Joseph, why on earth would Joseph not be more concerned with sealing his own children to him before trying to seal himself to other people's children? So you can decide for yourself what you want to believe. But personally, I think that this supposed sealing power was never about linking families, but more about creating a religious validity for Joseph's adulterous affairs. And then we got Baby Smith, who died very same day he was born, but wasn't sealed to his parents until February 28th, 1992. So here we do have 150 years, almost to the day, until he, without being sealed to his parents. So Emma and Joseph let me rephrase that. Here we have another baby of Joseph and Emma that had passed away prior to the date when Joseph and Emma were sealed. So this baby would not have been born in the covenant. Therefore, this baby would have to be sealed to them in order to be with them in the afterlife. Were Joseph and Emma anxious to seal this baby to them for eternity? Clearly not. It's 150 years. This baby was not sealed to them until 1992. How can anyone claim that even Joseph himself believed in this power to seal families when he could care less about sealing his own children to him? But he will certainly seal himself to 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, to 16-year-old Lucy Walker, and to several other underage girls. But he won't seal himself to his own children? I'm sorry, that does not make any sense to me. And then here we've got David Hiram Smith, born November 17th, 1844, married May 10th, 1870, and passed away August 29th, 1904. So here, you guys, temple work, or I should say ordinance in general, baptism on November 11th, 1961, confirmed same day. Initiatory, the family search family group record shows it was completed, but does not provide a date. And his endowment was completed on December 2nd, 1961. And he was the only child of Joseph Smith and Emma who was born in the covenant, so he did not need to be sealed to his parents. But sealing to his spouse did not happen until April 13th, 1964. So again, another child who's not baptized until after his own death. I think based off of all of this, it becomes very clear that neither Emma nor any of their children truly believed in Joseph's church. And if they did, if they truly believed it was the one true church and that these ordinances were necessary for salvation, don't you think they would have completed these ordinances for themselves during their lifetime? But obviously, according to Family Search, this did not happen. None of Joseph's children who lived to adulthood were ever sealed to their own spouses, clearly proving that they did not believe in Joseph's sealing power. Emma did not have their baby who was born after Joseph's death baptized into her husband's church, and I think it speaks a lot louder than words. There are many references to Emma saying she believed in Joseph's church, but if she really believed he was a prophet, and the LDS Church claims she believed in her husband and believed he was a prophet until the day she died, if she really did believe all this, why did she not baptize her children, get them confirmed into the church, teach them to be a part of that church and not go out and start their own RLDS church, which she did later join? As the saying goes, actions speak a lot louder than words, especially when it comes to ordinances that your supposed prophet of a husband claims that are necessary for salvation, and you don't even bother to ensure your children how these ordinances performed. I'm sorry. Again, these actions clearly show that Emma did not believe in Joseph's church.
Yeah, so, I think there's probably a lot of reasons we don't understand of why she just claimed to believe in him. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of things said by her, but as we've very clearly shown, Emma, her actions, I mean, to not seal your own children to you so that you can be together in the afterlife, that right there tells me everything I need to know.
Exactly. So
yeah,
there's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Emma did not believe. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode. We really appreciate it. Again, If you want to check out our website, check out those blog posts, check out our store. It'll be in the link in the description, churchexpositor.com. And we're also working on getting social media up on Instagram and TikTok, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. And next week, we finally make it to Joseph's death, which is going to be a super interesting episode. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you next time. Goodbye.